Wesaf Hale. Glad y'all are here tuning into the very first episode. Welcome. I'm Folcweard Laryeva. All right, let's begin. Again, this first episode is just going to serve as an introduction. All right, so future episodes, which tentatively I'm thinking scheduling for the 9th of every month, we'll delve deeper into things and get to things quicker. Because not going to try to do all these long introductions every time. That said, though, we know that plans always change and tend to evolve, so we'll be adaptable and see where this thing goes. Yeah. And then the phone rings in the background. That about figures. Always something, right? Okay. Where were we? Okay, so this thing, the Frithstead live stream. What are we doing here? Well, this whole thing started with a simple thought. Questions. People have them. We all do. I have them, but in this thing, that we generally call, in the general sense, heathenry, people have a lot of questions about that. Some are curious, some seeking, some are already heathen, whether they're new to our ancestral faith or they're lifelong adherents. Some are Christians who are just curious and they don't know what to think, because most Christians have never heard of their ancestral faith, let alone culture, or what they have heard is through the lens of misinformation, bad information, Hollywoodized or church propaganda. And as much it's common of the West, many are atheists or agnostics, and they're just like, curious. They just want to understand. And I definitely can understand that. I've been there myself. Having questions, wanting, needing to know. I personally have always been the searching kind. Even as a small child, I was the kid that was always, getting on everyone's nerves because I would always ask, why? And no matter what answer was given back, I always would press deeper and deeper. Of course, I've learned over the years that there's a limit to that, and eventually you have to just stop asking why. But with a lot of things, in the general sense, it's good to continue to ask why. But yeah, the ever searching kind, ever seeking knowledge, but not knowledge for the sake of knowing things, but knowledge to gain understanding. And then with understanding, the attainment of wisdom. Because wisdom or knowledge without wisdom is going to do more harm than good. And that's something that I remind myself every single day. Because I've suffered and made mistakes for, applying knowledge when the wisdom would have said not to or do it different. So it definitely always need to be tempered with wisdom. But, the goal is, it's something my dad taught me and he instilled it into me. And for that, I'm forever thankful. It's to never settle for mediocrity, but to always remember that effort is worth more than result. It's a good thing to remember, and that's something that I've written down and I repeat every so often to myself. But I've always loved studying and learning, and so I figured, why not open the door and talk about these things. Even through this live stream, it's through the virtual world, we're going to talk through these things together. But the way that I've seen the Frithstead, the way that it's always been, is a home for our folk. Within this home, heathenry is the hearth, but Christians, atheists, agnostics, whoever, you're welcome as well. I'm not going to push anyone away just because we might think differently or feel different. It's if there's a respect there, a mutual two-way respect, I'm good with that. So, excuse me. As for me, excuse me, who am I? Well, again, this is the first episode, so introductions are in order. Again, like I said, future episodes, we'll get to quicker content. But many of you know me, but for those who don't, I'm just a guy who spent a lifetime following the Odinic path of ever seeking for answers. Now, of course, I don't know everything. And be wary of people who, say otherwise, that they, you don't want to just trust somebody who always, acts as if they have the answer to everything. Because sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know. And another thing is it's always good to surround yourself with people smarter than you. And I feel like that's what I do, and it helps. But not knowing everything is not going to stop me from trying. It's that Odinic path of always seeking. But anyway, before I ramble on too much, I'll get back on track. I run the Frithstead. It's an educational and inspirational platform aimed at helping our folk. Now, again, it's educational and inspirational, two completely separate things, but yet they're overlapping, and they do complement each other. Okay, this section right here, I'm just going to read for because it's just easier. Okay, let me pull it up. Okay, quote: "The Frithstead is devoted to reviving the native Germanic faith through Sedish belief in the American folcsida. It serves as a hearth of education and inspiration, preserving the traditions of our ancestors while nurturing the whole person, the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical, through wisdom and learning. It upholds sacred Germanic traditions for future generations." End quote. Well, I've studied Old English for many years, and I have an in-depth Old English pronunciation chart published, various published translational credits, as well as a book, Trinother book, The Loyalty Writings, which, as the title says, it's on loyalty, because I love my family, I strive to live our faith daily, and I love our folk, something that I view as an inseparable trinity. And those publications can be found on Amazon. And of course, my website's still down, and it could be down for a little while, so I apologize for that, but I'm still trying to work on that. But all right, let's get into a little bit of background. Again, we're doing introductions here, first episode. So what's my background in the faith? How did I get here? And the reason why I'm wanting to do this introduction is because if anybody is going to take the time to listen to what I say, they have to know who I am. That I have to have a certain level of transparency, so that way, because anybody can say anything. So if I give you a little bit of a background, you'll have some understanding, and then at that point you can say, I don't care, I'm not going to listen, or okay, tell me more. Make you up your own mind. So like most really, I wasn't always a heathen, but I came to the faith in my own way, something different from what a lot of people come to. It was through that Odinic nature of mine that was always searching. So, long story short, and I'll try to be brief. I was raised without religion, and atheism was the predominant influence in my formative years. But deep inside, I never felt that was right. But so, needless to say, by the time I was 17, I got baptized as a Christian and tried to, quote unquote, live right, as they say. And that's just at that, you grow up in America, you think religion, that's the only really thing that's out there. So, just, okay, I'll look into that. But so flash forward a handful of years, I get married, and and the call to be a preacher ran strong within me. And yes, there was a time that I preached sermons and led the worship service and attended church regularly for many years, several years. But as what happens to many, I became disillusioned, and in my personal experience, I was seeing and experiencing, in real life, rampant hypocrisy, power play politics, and the inability for a lot of questions to be answered. Um, when I would ask these questions, I was met with hostility because it was viewed as if I was being argumentative, when in reality, I was just looking deeper and honestly wanting to know sincerely. What I did was what I've always done. I studied. But in the process of studying, and of course, this is a process over time, I ended up studying myself out of the religion. Now, meanwhile, while all of this was occurring, I was also studying just general history and specifically also my family history. Looking at the genealogies and just the stories from the grandparents and great grandparents, and just anybody I could talk to, great uncles and what have you. So you got three separate paths, and those three paths all led me to heathenry. And they were all separate paths, but they led me to the same place. The first path, being disillusioned with the church, I looked into the faith of my ancestors, and I knew that Christianity, just from the simple facts of, you know, reading and learning, that it's a foreign element that was imposed on Europe. Uh, the second path, history, uh, of all the history in the world, I was drawn to the history of Europe and her people, my people. Of course, back in those early days, I didn't realize why. Because I would, look at, Chinese history and, of course, American Indian stuff. I always found that fascinating. To a small degree, I still do now. But unbeknownst to me at the time, I was being drawn to Europe. Now, I'm very imaginative, and when I think or read things, I can form very realistic visuals and mini movies in my mind, if you will. So I developed a love for my folk that became very real and natural, just to my being, my inner core. Um, that because when you look at history, it's almost like it would come alive in my mind. Um, the third path, my family history, I felt a loving connection with the men and women who are my blood. And when I would think of them, it would just fill me with a sense of pride and a sense of love. It it's like it's like you look at your children, you look at your spouse, you look at um, a close sibling, let's say, or you look at your parents, and you feel something that words can't describe. Um, which is it's love. Love is one of those things that we all feel, but it's not the easiest thing to put into words what exactly it is. But I found myself feeling that for the ancestors when I'd go through the family genealogy. And so combining these three paths of religiousness, of history, of family, they all led me to heathenry. And I asked myself, if I'm a descendant of Europe, okay, if I'm a Germanic man, then why am I not embracing that culture? As would it not be my inheritance, my birthright? And if the European folk, the Germanic folk, had a religion for thousands upon thousands of years, stretching far back into prehistory, then why do I not know anything of the native faith of my blood? of my race, of my people, of my family. And it was at that point when those three uh, paths came together that I'm like, I need to look into this. I have to. I wasn't sure what I was going to find exactly, but it didn't matter because I knew I had to look into it because it was a part of me. And of course, all of us, as we age, we discover things about ourselves. And of course, it can be a frightening thing or it can be a wonderful thing, but it's still something that happens and needs to happen. So, anyway, some years passed. I don't remember how many years, whatever, it's not important, but I had the internet, and this was earlier in the internet days, and I knew a little less about the internet than I do now, but I bounced in and out searching for the faith and just random Google searches to see what was out there, but I didn't know where to look. And then in 2017, I discovered that which would change my life forever. And it would be the second heathen book that I ever read, The Asatru Edda by the Neurona Society. And I'm so thankful that The Asatru Edda was the second book that I came across, because it's so much better to come into something like that early on so you don't get bogged down in all the garbage that's out there, because there are so many books and web pages and stuff that's out there where goes back, anybody can say anything about anything and call themselves an expert, but you know how it is. But if you're curious, the first book was Children of Odin by Padraig Colum. But anyway, it wasn't too long after that. It was late 2017, I think, maybe early 2018. I met Mark Prier on Facebook, and very shortly after that, I joined the Neurona Society. So it's been quite a few years from now, and but that's when I began my real learning. And a lot of you know who the Neurona Society is, but for those of you who don't, the you know again, I'm going to try to speak general because I don't know who all is listening. The Neurona Society is a research and educational organization that's devoted to our ancestral Germanic faith. But not just that, but the Neurona Society, we seek to learn as much as we can about it in its purest form, in the truth of it. We research the sources carefully. We try to separate what's heathen versus what was altered by later Christian influence. But the goal isn't to invent or modernize, quote unquote, Asatru, but it's to rebuild it on its original foundations. In a way that where we look at evidence, we apply logic, and apply a proper research methodology, epic method. And we could talk about the epic method later. And of course, there's other videos out there talking about it. But this was my true foundation to faith. I came in green, not knowing most of the known arguments or even the, quote unquote, big name authors and movers and shakers. I didn't know who these people were. So it was just the name's a name. Okay, I don't know who you are. Even if everyone else is like, what? You don't know who that is? It's like, oh, you haven't read that? And I was like, no, I don't. So, because yeah, it is funny because in those early years, there were those that did find it hard to believe that I never heard of this person or that person or read this book, but it was true, but looking back, it really was a blessing in disguise, because the thing is like what I was, saying just a minute ago, I didn't have all the baggage of all those preconceived notions. But of course, you have to be honest. I'm human. Wasn't immune to bias. None of us are. But without having all that baggage, it allowed me to focus on the faith in a a fast track manner of focusing on what truly mattered, if you will. In going to the sources as opposed to the, like I mentioned, the books that are just written by this heathen author or that heathen author who spout their opinions. Let's see, just a quick little side note, with a lot of these authors out there, when you look deeper, oftentimes they're just giving opinions, but those opinions have no foundation. And they're just opinions. And, an opinion is only as strong as the foundation it stands upon. Because I can give an opinion about open heart surgery, but what value does that opinion have? Not much, because I don't know anything about open heart surgery. So that's just, whenever you listen to anybody, always, just check the things they say or where they come from, that sort of thing. But, a faith will lack legitimacy if it's just based on personal beliefs of individuals. But again, I'm digressing here. Yeah. Oh, that just made me think, back in those early days, and another thing that I recall is, I literally was overwhelmed in those first, 2 or 3 years, because I was surrounded by some very intelligent folk, and all I could do was listen and just soak up the conversations like a sponge. And it is true what they say. You learn more by listening and keeping your mouth shut than talking too much. But those are some happy memories. But anyway, more time passed, and I found myself, learning more, being involved more, and then I ended up obtaining several leadership positions within the Neuron Society. And then, of course, I'm skipping fast here, not to get too bogged down in memory lane here, but a few more years passed, and fate went ever as she does, and I took a short break, because every now and then, if we go too hard, too heavy, too long, however enjoyable it might be, it can wear on you, and you need a break every now and then. So I took a short break. I don't remember how long, it just more than a little, but not a lot. And then when I decided to jump back in, that's when the Frithstead reemerged. The Frithstead is my own project, but it's a true child birthed from the society. If it wasn't for the Neuron Society and my involvement with them, then the Frithstead would not exist. And now, to avoid confusion, I am still a proud member of the society. So it's not like I'm separate. I'm still a member, and I'm still very proud and promote the society and have many friends within, and we still work together when opportunity and occasion arises. But anyway, okay, the Frithstead. I'll provide a brief history of the Frithstead specifically. All right, so for the first few years, the Frithstead focused. I'm kind of going to give you an overview on the evolution, because with Telegram, you can go to the search feature, and 4.5, 5 years now of content. You can go back to the beginning, and it might sound a little different from the middle, might sound a little different from now. So I'll give you like a brief, overview of the evolution, if you will. But in the earliest days, focused on folcsida. And folcsida is just a word that means folkways, like the ways of the folk. You could say customs, all right? Which is the same thing with Sedish and Sedianism. The Sida on folk and Sed on Sedish is, it comes from the same root. But folcsida referred to the Anglo-Saxon expression of heathenry. Now, that said, with my Sedish foundation firmly planted within me, what emerged was more so an Anglo-Saxon expression of Sedish belief. And that is different. There's overlap, but it's different than, just saying, no, it's 100% Anglo-Saxon period and everything else is, pushed to the wayside. No, it's not like that. But at that time, my reading shifted primarily towards the Anglo-Saxon studies, because, again, that was the focus at the time. And with my linguistic inclinations, if you will, I did a lot of translating of Old Norse words into Old English, because there's a lot of Old English that's vocabulary that just didn't survive, and there's a lot of uh, Old Norse words that don't have Old English translations. And so I was still, staying true to the faith, and it's sticking with the Old Norse. That's the material that we have, so we can't discard that. That's sacred. So I spent a lot of time translating it, and that was, very, very fun if you're a word guy. But I can nerd out on word stuff because it's just fun to me. But good, honest reconstruction efforts. But unfortunately, due to the ravages of time and unfortunate concerted efforts by certain forces, most of the Anglo-Saxon sources were destroyed or lost. It sucks, but it is what it is. But as the years progressed, I had thoughts of going deeper down the Anglo-Saxon path. But again, my foundation, that Sedish foundation, always would tug at me and be like, this is truth. And so you might ask, how? Well, okay, let me say this. Without adequate source material, a faith really cannot truly be reconstructed without a lot of guesswork. And whereas it sometimes is necessary to make assertions and build off a theory, those assertions and theories must stand up to the scrutiny of research, of logic. Again, going back to, the research methodology. So when we look at the Norse sources, history has preserved enough of those that we can reconstruct an accurate faith. Okay, so I'm not saying I or the Frithstead gave up on the Anglo-Saxon and is just now following Norse. No, I'm not saying that. But we must listen to fate, use logic, and hold ourselves accountable to higher thinking and higher ways of being. Because what's more important? Feeling like you're right or what is right? What you want or what is real? These are the questions that most people don't ask themselves, but we need to. If more accurate information comes our way, we must allow ourselves to accept it and evolve for what's more important. Again, that what I just said, thinking or wanting to be right or what is right. And on that, I really can't repeat that enough, because isn't that's something that all of us as humans have to ask ourselves. But I realized over time that our ancestors willingly changed cultures and languages depending on the necessity. Sometimes they migrated to other lands and had to adapt. Sometimes a different tribe defeated theirs and their lives were turned upside down. Economic factors, for instance, adopting certain things from other peoples when trade and commerce became a regular part of their lives. The examples are everywhere, really. But building on this, I think that sometimes we today try to hold on too tightly to our strict tribal lines. Like, for instance, my father's line is German. So I have to follow the Germanic religion, right? It's wherever a father's line. But if yours is Anglo-Saxon, then should I say, nope, nope, we're completely different, unrelated, you're basically like a foreigner to me? No, because the Germans and the Anglo-Saxons are both Germanic. They trace back to the same basic culture. Now, I do believe it's very, very important to know our specific heritage lines, but we must understand how our ancestors thought and how they were adaptable. And understanding the mentality of our ancestors puts things in perspective a bit. Now, again, I'll mention that the Germanic folk all practiced the same religion. The Norse, the Anglo-Saxons, the continental Germans, etc. What they had was different cultural aspects that made them unique. The various lowercase t traditions, foods, language, aesthetics like clothing, hairstyles, minor traditions, various styles, etc., but they practiced the same general religion. To say that they were completely different, I'll use a Christian example. It's like saying a Pentecostal Baptist practice completely different religions. When we know that they both follow the same religions, it's just expressed differently. So, this all leads into the question, where's the Frithstead today? Well, I wrote a tagline, and it's, quote, restoring the folk through the American folcsida of Sedish belief. All right, I'll explain on that. Sedish belief, or Sedianism as some say. It's the ancestral faith of the Germanic peoples, okay? Now, we say Sedish or Sedian as opposed to heathen as a qualifier to refer to it being the closest that we have to what we can call traditional or authentic heathenry. Heathenry is a general term. It can mean different things to different people. It's just like the use of the word Christianity. It means different things to different people. Because, with those different customs and, expressions, you would not, in that sense, you would not say that Pentecostal is exactly the same as Baptist, is exactly the same as Catholic. No, they are different, but they're all Christian. So similarly, Sedianism, Sedish belief, is not also true, but both can be called heathen. Again, one thing I'll say is that anytime you're talking with people, the best way to clear up confusion or misunderstandings is define terms before you delve into a deeper conversation. Define terms. When I say this word, this is what I mean. What do you mean when you say that same word? To try to get on the same page, but anyway, moving on. The phrase American folcsida. Well, it represents the living expression of our native faith. Sedianism within the context of our American folk. The term folcsida, again, folkways, refers to the ancestral custom of our Germanic ancestors, but also it does apply to us today, as we do not anachronistically reenact the past. We live today trying to honor the patterns of belief that our ancestors once built. We are the living descendants continuing it on. We're not trying to copy, we're just trying to continue. Like family traditions. There's traditions that your parents instilled into you, and You want to carry those traditions forward, but you're not trying to be your parents. But that kind of makes things a little bit clearer. So, the American folcsida is simply the American expression of Sedish faith that's renewed and reborn in this land, where many tribal threads have come together to form a new folk. And we see this in history. I'll explain a bit, give a few examples. So back in time a little bit, Germanic tribes, you had the Angles, the Saxons, the Utes, and they once united to form what eventually became the English people, which in turn became a distinct folk in and of themselves. Yet they were bound by shared language, shared blood, cultural similarities. And likewise, in the forging of what made us Americans, we see a similar convergence of kindred tribes, the English, the Germans, the Norse. Then you got to throw in closely related people such as the Scots and Irish, and then even some close cousins like the French and Italians. These Europeans were diverse in their local and regional customs, but yet they were similar enough that merging was relatively easy, like within a couple generations, or even less, but time passed and they merged, and now look, 2.5 centuries later, here we are. Yeah, we're still diverse, but we're still one folk. I'm sitting here in Texas, and I can, travel to, I don't know, Idaho, and I'm not going to feel like a foreigner. We still share common heritage and common cultural foundation. We're an established folk, and our American folcsida is a testament to that unity, a weaving, if you will, of the tribal folkways into a single coherent identity. Now, it's not erasing our original European tribal heritages, but strengthening them with a shared reality, because we truly are a pan-Germanic folk. Sedish belief is not a matter of preference. Sedish belief is the lifeblood of our folk. It's our inheritance. And when we embrace that birthright, it shapes every part of our life. But for another time, and this has been covered in other podcasts by some very good speakers, but Sedish belief does have a list of tenets that define our belief and what separates us from others who call themselves heathen. But all right, I've gone on long enough. Hopefully it wasn't rambling too long. But if I was, that's okay. It's the first episode, right? Okay, so we'll go through the questions. Sent out some advertisements to various groups, and just wanted to kind of I didn't know what questions I'd get back in response, but I got some varied questions, some that can be considered, easy, simple, and other ones that were like, ooh, good. I get to do a little bit of studying on this one, and everything in between, right? All right. Let's begin, shall we? Question 1. What are your stances on universalism and other heathen organizations? All right. Well, first, I recognize that many people find meaning and comfort in universalist faiths. It's easy. It reaches people on an emotional level when they're searching. It provides comfort when people feel lost. And who doesn't want to feel accepted or feel like they matter? We all want to feel accepted, and we all want to feel like we matter. We all want nicely packaged answers to give us purpose and direction, right? That's pretty universal. pun intended. But so yeah, it makes sense. But from a Sedish perspective, universalism carries with it a very unintended cost, a devil in the details type thing, if you will. History has shown us time and again by its nature that a universal faith seeks to bring all peoples under a single spiritual, moral, and cultural framework. And there's a danger in that, because to do so, it must override the distinctions that make each culture, tribe, and race unique. It slowly replaces the native with the foreign. It's when one belief claims to be the only truth for all humanity, it inevitably diminishes the truths that arose organically among the different peoples, the local gods, the ancestral customs, the family traditions, the languages, the folkways that gave life to a culture and gradually replaced by the uniform pattern of a universal doctrine. And this is why Sedianism rejects universalism. Okay, certainly, we don't ever want to harm folks. We don't want to persecute folks. We don't want to be negative towards, folks. There's no purpose for that when, people are just trying to live their lives and minding their own business. And we should want, freedom, because we never advocate for any of those negative things. But we reject universalism because we wish that every people, period, can preserve those things that make them who they are. I don't want to take a vacation, hypothetical, just throwing this out there. I don't want to take a vacation to Japan and have everyone be like me. No, I want to see the Japanese art. I want to see have their food. I want to, visit one of their temples and just observe and just experience, and I'll be thankful that they'll have their culture intact. Or then I'll hop on a plane and I don't know, go somewhere else, and same thing, India, for example, and I'd want to do the same thing with them. I wouldn't want it to be, well, we're all doing the exact same thing. The preservation of natural diversity through ethnic faiths. Now, in my estimation, I believe that an Indian shouldn't follow an African faith any more than a Chinaman should follow an American Indian faith, or, for that matter, a European following a Middle Eastern faith. Now, if someone chooses to do something like that, it's not my place to put you down or condemn you. You do you, man. It's like, that's fine. That doesn't make you a bad person. Certainly not. We all have our choices to make. That's just the way I feel. But each people, I believe, should have their own, and they should be proud of that. I'd like to say, like, how should I put this? That okay, I have a family. Why would I turn my back on them and claim to be part of another family? I wouldn't. I have my own. Now, it's been put this way before. We have unifiers who seek to merge all humanity under one creed. And not to be too political, because I try hard to avoid politics, but universalism is essentially spiritual globalism. Now, whereas me, I would view myself as a diversifier, a traditionalist who rejects this, and I want to preserve all the ethnic ancestral faiths of all peoples, period, all of them, the whole world over. Universalism, even when well-intentioned, functions like globalism in the political realm. Globalism claims to bring unity and peace, yet in practice, it asks different nations and cultures to surrender their identities for the sake of a single world order. And in the same way, I believe universalism asks people to surrender their ancestral faiths and their cultures and their traditions, etc., in favor of a single divine authority and way of doing things. And that's just one of those things that I personally feel strongly with that. But like I said, if you disagree, that's okay. Not going to dislike you for it. Well, we can still be good. But I'd say this. Universalism can replace organic diversity, or it does rather, with artificial uniformity, because we are tribal by nature. All of us are. Its systems create a spiritual monoculture, which inevitably bleeds into every single facet of life. And to me, that would be a loss for all humanity, because true diversity is having the many expressions the world over. Each people have their own sacred inheritance. They have their own myths, their own rites, their own languages, values, etc. And when these are erased under the banner of universality, of a so-called one, I just feel like there's a natural beauty and balance to life that's lost. And it goes against natural law in favor of an artificial political construct masquerading as spiritual. Again, I'm not trying to upset anybody. I'm just saying it how I feel. Just being honest. We don't try to tell others to forsake their ways. We're not going to forsake ours. True peace and mutual respect comes not from sameness, but from each people standing firm in who they are while respecting the others for doing the same. In other words, I'll respect you, you respect me, and we're good. So while I can respect those who follow universalist faith, that's just a belief that I personally cannot support. In my heart, universalism is like asking me to turn my back on what the gods gave my folk, what they gave my family, what they gave me. My inheritance, my birthright, and to exchange the heritage of my ancestors for a doctrine that seeks to make all people the same, and being foreign on top of that, not Germanic, not European. I don't know. It's just, like I said, not right. But I do believe that the Sedish path is to honor differences as sacred and to preserve our own traditions out of gratitude. But I'll move on here. In relation to this, though, I want to close this question. I do want to talk about folkishness and what it is. To be folkish is that's a word, at least within heathen circles, that's talked about a lot. Folkish versus universalist. All right. Simply put, to be folkish is to practice the traditional faith of your folk, which includes a specific culture. And I want to add that today, most use the term from the modern German Volkisch, and that carries very strong race-based connotations. But ultimately, I don't believe that this is the correct definition, which, as I said, is the practice. The definition, what I'm saying, the correct definition, folkishness is the practice of traditional ethnic faith. So I would say that folkish individuals have to ask, are they religion first or race first? And this is an important distinction, because if it's race first, then you open the doors to allow chaos, degeneracy, for the racial aspect to trump the religious aspect. Because it's like race first, where so it's like, okay, well, what you believe is not as important as your race. And I can't agree with that. Because, if it's religion first, then it allows for a strong and solid foundation upon which to build. Because when you have a group that's established religion first, then you're going to have higher standards. You'll have established morals, expected virtues, you'll have laws, you'll have an authoritative hierarchy. Now, of course, those who are religion first, as all religions have this prerogative, they can allow or not allow whomever they want or don't want into the group. So your membership requirements can be, what it is. That's normal. That's to be expected. If one doesn't like it, they find another group. It's kind of like what I've heard a lot of us Gen Xers say. You're flipping the channels on TV and don't just get all offended at something. If you don't like it, turn the channel. Problem solved. But ultimately that is tribalism, where each group forms their membership criteria, and to our core, all humans are naturally tribalist. But I will clarify, heathenry is an ethnic Germanic faith. So take that for what you will. Okay. Oh, yeah. I almost forgot. To the question about other heathen organizations. Well, I'm going to say this. Honestly, I don't give them much thought. I'm open to having conversations with anyone. Again, as I've said already, respect, friendliness, good intentions. But mind you, if the individual organization, is knowingly completely different to the degree that they're probably just going to come against me, argue, be argumentative, be contentious, then of course I have enough wisdom just to stay away and leave them be. I'm not going to put myself out there because I don't want to argue with people. I'll have a good discussion with you, but I don't want to argue. Yeah, that's just too much stress. But if we have enough overlapping views with enough agreement to begin with, then a good conversation is always welcomed. I've just learned a long time ago that much effort is wasted and doesn't usually amount to much. No really good comes from it, just unnecessary stress if we're just trying to argue and convincing others that we're right, when in the end, people are going to do what they're going to do. Facts and logic, unfortunately, don't always matter, and it's just one of those things, So that said, I'm not going to name, this or that organization. I'm going to be respectful, but given my views on universalism, my position should be easy enough to figure out if you're familiar with this or that organization. All right. Okay, question 2. I'm not heathen, but I'm very curious about what modern heathenry actually looks like for y'all. All right, this is a much, much better one. Okay, in light of my earlier comments, my backstory on how I got where I'm at, discovering my ancestral faith, how it discovering my ancestral faith, it felt like coming home, and I did have some level of comfortability with Christianity, but it was still like staying at someone else's home, even in the happiest of times. But when I returned to my people's faith, I felt, spiritually speaking, like I was home with my family, my dearest loved ones. Staying at a friend's house is all fine and dandy, and you can have a good time and have some great memories, but there's no place like home. No place like home. So, with Sedish belief, what can be called traditional heathenry, but whatever, heathenry works just fine in the context of this episode. It isn't about, dressing up or pretending to be a Viking. That's just Hollywood LARPing. And honestly, yeah, it's pretty cringe. Um, Heathenry is about family, living close to your people, living close to nature, close to the gods. It's the old religion of our ancestors that we're living today. You know, we're just normal people doing normal things and are religious and hold spirituality near and dear to our heart. We see the divine woven into every aspect of life, if you will. And in that sense, it's no different than other religions. But our ancestors called it Ad Forn Seether, the old custom. It's a faith not invented by people, but as the oldest European faith since before recorded history. Our ways were given to us by the gods themselves through what we call the ancestral endowment. It's a sacred inheritance. We have divine laws, virtues, duties that's meant to keep our folk and our world in balance. But what does it look like today? That is the question. We seek to live by the same principles that our ancestors lived by. We have the Sedish tenets, which are our core statements of belief. We're strict theists. We believe that our gods and goddesses are real, literal beings within the natural universe. They're not archetypes. They're not just stories, but they're, real deities. We believe that creation is filled with order, and there is a lot of good in the universe, and order. And the big thing is that there's chaos and there's order, and we try to emulate the gods in the sense that the gods strive to bring order out of, or take chaos and bring order to it, and we try to do the same thing. It's our duty to preserve our culture, to live in truth, to honor divine law, and to pass on what was given to us. But it is more than a belief system. It is a way of life that guides everything from how we worship, how we interact with each other, and how we raise our children. I'll say this to better understand. I recommend these books. Of course, all of them are by the Nerona Society. There's the Odinist Edda, the Avenrunar books 1 and 2, and the Avenlugar. They cover the lore, the rituals, and the law of our faith. Now, that's a lot of reading, mind you, so if you want something short and quick, then I'd recommend the Sedian Handbook. You can all find these on Amazon. Just search the Nerona Society. But, okay, where were we? All right. In discussing heathenry, what does it look like? We recognize something called needs, and 9 specifically, that there's 9 forbidden acts that violate divine law. A need is a wrong action, what one might call sin. But I say that very, very loosely, so don't take that too far, okay? They're not just rules to obey, they're more like boundaries meant to protect order, honor, and trust. Things like murder, perjury, adultery, sacrilege, greed, thievery, treason, slander, cruelty. These things are needs. They're stains upon one's soul and stains upon your family. When a person commits one, they step out of harmony with both the gods and their folk. Now, we don't believe, I certainly don't believe, that just because someone commits one or more of these things that They're just automatically condemned or ostracized. Um, there's Sedianism is a faith of atonement. It's a faith of second chances. And this is important. A common saying is, "We are our deeds." That's something that is said a lot, and it's true. We are. Atonement is not through confession nor forgiveness given to you by a priest, but it's through the actions of the one who did the wrong. Atonement comes by restoring balance, or attempting earnestly and sincerely to restore balance. It's through deeds that correct what was broken. It's up to us to make things right by standing up, facing the consequences, and trying to live better, getting over yourself, and just make things right. That's not complicated, through truth, courage, hard work, and sometimes a lot of time, that stain can be removed. That's real atonement. It's earned, not granted. This is a hard concept for a lot to accept. And why do I say that? Because we live in a world where people think that if they just ignore the wrongdoing for long enough, then others will eventually get over it. But that's not how it works. Whether now or later, eventually we got to make things right with those we've wronged. Now, that's not saying if we go to make things right and the other person is basically like, "Yeah, whatever, I don't care, I reject you." If you did true atonement in your heart and trying to make things right, then that's all you can do. And then at that point, you just have to move on. And speaking of moving on, we believe in an afterlife, but it's not a, there's something that's called a hell thing. Let's say that we call it, and it's a divine court of judgment. When a person dies, their deeds are weighed by the gods, and all people go to hell. Hell is a heathen concept. It's a native Germanic, European concept. But hell is a place of peace. Hell is where the halls of our ancestors. It's where we go in peaceful rest, and where we go to in revisit the family line and be with our ancestors. And then from judgment, depending, could be sent elsewhere. Like those whose deeds were those bad deeds were numerous enough, or truly, truly bad individuals, never felt remorse, or just did, despicable things, beyond redemption. Then the place that they go to is what we call Nibelhel. Now, the afterlife is can be a bit complicated, because that could be a whole talk in and of itself. But it's essentially a moral system where what's earned in life is answered in death. Now, we have what we call a Fylgja, what one might call our guardian spirit. But now, what is Fylgja? What's the name mean? It means follower. So our Fylgja is our follower, for she's always with us. And when we do stand before judgment, we'll have no words to speak, because our time is up. Our deeds are done. They've been recorded. We can't do any more. So it's our Fylgja who will speak for us to the gods, relaying to them our deeds. And so all the more, it's now in this life. This life is the time to be the best person that you can be and to live honorably. Now, our rituals, let's speak on rituals. They are our most holy and sacred actions. We have 3 main yearly gatherings, each with 3 observances, so 9 rituals total. Them being the start of winter, known as winter nights. We have midwinter, known as Yule, and then we have the start of summer, which is generally called Sumermal. And these festivities, we call them Veslas. Now, the main day of a Vesla is called the lake, and that's where we gather together, we eat food, we play games, we just enjoy one another and have fun, you know? Then that evening, when it's time to get serious and perform our sacred rituals, then we move on from the time of revelry and games and having fun, and we have a wraith. That's a procession. And that leads us to the holy ground where we honor the gods in worship. And this we call bloat, where we offer the gods our gifts within a helps and a needs scenario. We ask for help against the great calamities that befall us. And like those things would be like, we ask for peace to protect us against strife or war. You know, we offer protection. We ask for protection against harm coming our way. We ask for good health, for protection against, sickness and illness. We ask for fertility for our folk, so that we can prosper and grow. So ask for fertility against the infertility of the destruction of our folk. Now, moving on, family is at the heart of our faith. They are always on our mind, and everything we do is for them. Heathenry at its core, and I've said this numerous times in the course of this episode, is an ancestral faith. We honor the ancestries because they're our family. The reason why we're here, and one day we'll be the ancestors of those who come after us. But, when we do something to give attention to the ancestors, we light a candle or we speak their names in story, and that is not worshiping them, in one sense of the word. But what we're doing is we're honoring their legacy and keeping the chain of connection strong. Their wisdom flows forward through us. Their deeds become our strength. See, we believe that we inherit a portion of their luck. And in turn, we pass down a portion of our luck to our children. And in that sense, we are all connected. Yeah, we're definitely all connected, and that's the thing about the luck, is that it's not that, when you say, good luck, that it's not just a thing of chance. It's, the strength of your luck, is your ability to succeed or fail. The influence that is put upon your actions, whether you to the degree of success or failure that will result, if you will. But anyway, let's move on. A saying that I really, really like, I even have it on my stali, my altar. It's from Beowulf, and it's Gatha wir swahil shall, which is Old English for fate goes ever as she shall. We call fate Orlog or Wyrd. So I'll talk about fate just a little bit, not too long. I'll keep it short, I promise. So fatalism holds that events are subjected to predetermined actions. Now, there are those that are called the Norns. Okay, the Norns are certain higher powers that are above the gods. Okay, they established laws, they allotted life, and they established fate. You see, fate and prophecy pervades our religion. We affirm that fate is natural law, and natural law is a very real thing. There's no radical free will, as they say. A limited free will, if you will, but not radical free will. All is chance. Not everything is determined by us and our power. Think of it like this, okay? We're playing a game. We are playing a game of chess with a grand chess master, like world champion, okay? And in this game, of course, we acknowledge the predetermined nature of the game's rules, right? You can't play outside the rules, and so therefore, we have limited choices in the moves that we're able to make because we're restricted by those rules, right? But even so, the 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 players retain a limited autonomy and limited decision making. But even under the constraints of those rules, we still have the freedom to select moves and devise strategies. Now, that there's going to be external factors and opponent moves and things of that nature that will influence the game, right? Um, but our choices and decisions still carry significance and shape the game's happenings, despite the fact that the final outcome is predetermined. All right, fate has determined something; it's going to happen no matter what we do, and that's why I'm using the example of a grandmaster, because they're going to be so good they'll beat us at chess no matter what, you know. But like I said, just an example. But in the end, anyway, in this chess game we call life, we do the best we can with what we have. And, we don't know what is fated and what isn't. And trying to figure it out, well, I'll just stop you right there and say, don't. You're not going to be able to figure it out. So we treat the past, everything that happened in the past, as if it was fated to be so. In the future, whether it's this, that, or the other is fated or isn't, well, we don't know. So we treat the future as if it isn't. And then that puts it right back to we are our deeds. All right. Just do the best you can. Try to be the best that you can be. Now, heathenry isn't a salvation faith. We don't need a savior to save us. We don't seek salvation from the world, but we do seek to live honorably within it. One thing that like Christians will say, grace is getting what we don't deserve, and mercy is not getting what we deserve. That's a sentiment connected to believing, as the Bible says, our righteousness is as filthy rags, and talking about us being born into a depraved state. We don't believe that. I certainly do not believe that. I'll say something akin to whatever life, however unfair it might be, whatever it throws at us, when I stand before the judgment seat, I'll get what I deserve at that time because it'll be based on my deeds. I'm definitely not perfect. I've made my fair share of mistakes, but every single day I try to do better. And yeah, sometimes I fail and I'm like, well, I thought I was trying to do better, and then here I went, screwed this up again. But then there's other times where I'm on a roll and I'm getting better and better and better and better. And it's kind of like if you look at your life, like how it is like a graph, and a lot of economic graphs do this with how prices will rise, prices will fall, prices will rise, prices will fall. But you can't look at that. You have to look at the zoom out, look at the big picture, and despite those rising and fallings, is the trend ultimately rising? Are you trending upward even if you don't feel like it day to day or week by week? That's the main thing. Sometimes we just have to zoom out and put things in perspective. But I feel like I might be digressing a little bit, so I don't know. You be the judge of that. All right. This is what heathenry looks like today when it's lived. Again, it's normal people doing normal things, each trying to do the best we can with what we have. Very family and folk orientated. We give thanks to the gods, love our children. Life's sacred. It's all, like I said, a lot of normal stuff. And that's what I love about it. So, question 3. I was wondering, what would you suggest to someone who is curious about heathenry and perhaps could be shown to them as a way to dip their toes in, so to speak? Well, short but sweet, find others. The internet is a great tool. There are several good chat groups with friendly atmospheres, with a lot of good folk, a lot of smart folk. I recommend finding a Sedian, and they can point you in the right direction. And if you don't know of any, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to tell you and talk to you, and even if you reach out to me and want to find other ones to talk to, that's fine. You won't hurt my feelings. It's all good. Now, I'll say this, chat groups are good. It's good to be in these chat groups, but nothing beats real life. Because in the end, internet is still internet, and we can't allow internet life to be, a permanent substitute for our real life. So I always encourage, get out there and socialize. You don't want to be, just at the keyboard all the time. That's unnatural. And even if you're not a good speaker or you might be socially awkward, that's okay. I'm an extremely social awkward person. That's why most of the things that I do, I'm writing, because it's not me talking. This episode here, I'm out of my comfort zone. This is just not something that I do, but it is real life. And I am trying to set an example, trying to do something that's good for me, that'll help others. And that's all I encourage other people to do, is just go out there, get yourself out of your comfort zone, and just do it, Okay, I can give you like a reading list. This actually was another question as far as reading list, but it fits perfectly into the question that I'm already talking about as far as dipping your toes in. So I'll give a short reading list. And this is what I would recommend on a reading list to get started. Okay. The Sedian Handbook by the Nerona Society. And then we have Our Father's God Saga by Victor Rydberg. The Odinist Edda by the Nerona Society. And the Poetic Edda by Caroline Larrington, 2nd edition. Those will give you a brief introduction on the rituals and various things. But a lot of it, most of those are just like the lore, the stories. And so it's an excellent starting point because it gives you something to talk about. Now, if you want to delve deeper, now I would recommend the Voluspa translation by Keith Osgood. Best translation out there, hands down. That's a must-have. Hold on one second. Let's see. Check my. Okay. But Keith's translation is way better. Fantastic. Um, I have a book out there, Trinother, The Loyalty Writings. That's a good, easy read. Um, if you want to get more into a little bit of the philosophy, there's the Otis book by Mark Prier. And now there's heavier reading. The heavier reading would be Victor Rydberg's Investigations into Germanic Mythology, the Avenrunar books 1 and 2, and the Avenluger, which I mentioned those before, but those are the deeper level, heavier reading. So, okay, well, yeah, I guess that's a good place to stop for tonight. So, I want to say thank you. You tuned in, you took the time to listen to me, and I can imagine that's a chore. That kid. But I know this episode's been a bit of a long introduction in that first half or 3/4, whatever it was, but it needed to be, because we got to lay the groundwork, tell the story, get to know each other, set the stage for everything that is going to come on in the future. After this episode, from here on, we're going to move quicker into the questions, jump into things faster. Again, as a reminder, I'm tentatively planning to do another one on December 9th, 6 p.m. as well. The 9th of every month, 6 p.m. So if you're interested, mark it on your calendars. And no worries, I'll let y'all know when it gets closer. I'll be posting it on Frithstead Telegram, Frithstead Facebook, sharing it to a few pages. The good folk out there in heathendom, may be so kind as to share it. But the goal of these live streams isn't just about talking. I do sincerely, honestly, I want to build a real sense of community, and this is what the Frithstead has always been about. Peace, kinship, a home for our folk, a stead of Frith. So I'll say if something tonight sparked a question in your mind, or if you'd like to share thought, reach out to me. The more we talk, the more we learn together, because that's what it's all about, is talking and developing relationships, learning. Anybody can teach anybody something at any time. Of course, the classic example is when like a 2 or 3-year-old will say something to an adult, and that adult looks at that little kid and is like, now that's honest and profound. Wow. And that's the thing that I love, is that we can do that with each other. It's that attitude of, if I'm showing I'm wrong, don't get upset. It's like, okay, well, cool. That means I learned something. And if I learned something, I'm better for it. Good attitude to have. But anyway, these episodes will keep growing. That's the plan anyway. Our task is simply this: meet life with courage, honor, and good intentions. And remember, Gatha Weird Swaheo shall. Fate goes ever as she shall. So until next time, stay strong, stay true. Hold fast to your faith. Hold your family tight. Love them with everything you have. And love your folk. And I'll sign off with, again, another thank you. And hail the gods. Hail our ancestors. And hail the Frithstead. And I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one.